Salut! Today we're going to cover lesson 27. We're going to see the verb voir and I'll explain quickly the difference between voir and regarder. After that, we'll spend some time on relative pronouns, meaning when you have the word that, who or whom in the middle of a sentence like the book that I read or the man who speaks. Now, this point is a bit hard and very grammatical, so we'll finish with some fun expressions to learn in French with teeth. In the notes, there's an extra point on avoir mal à and faire mal à, but since we've already seen avoir mal à, I'm going to ask you to read the notes to see that particular point. Alright, first, let's go over the verb voir. The verb voir in French means to see, and it's conjugated in the present as follows. Please repeat after me. Je vois, tu vois, il voit, nous voyons, vous voyez, il voit. The verb voir uses the auxiliary avoir, so it is conjugated in the passé composé as follows. Please repeat after me. J'ai vu, tu as vu, il a vu, nous avons vu, vous avez vu, ils ont vu. And finally, using our present nous voyons and removing the ONS, we can use our root VOIR and conjugate the verb voir in the imparfait as follows. Please repeat after me. Je voyais, tu voyais, il voyait, nous voyons, vous voyez, il voyait. Now, you may remember that we learned the verb regarder before, and you might be confused as to when to use voir or regarder. The easy explanation is that you should use regarder when you would use watch or to look in English, and voir when you would use to see. The slightly more complicated explanation is that to see is passive, as in you see something that is put in front of you, while regarder is active, as in you are actively choosing to watch or look at something. In the real world, we mostly use voir for movies at the theater, as in someone is projecting it for you and you're seeing it, and regarder for TV, as in you choose to sit down and watch something on TV. Here are a few examples of the verb voir. Hier, j'ai vu un film. Means yesterday, I saw a movie. But you can also see a doctor, for example. Demain, je vais voir un médecin. Means tomorrow, I'm going to see a doctor. And finally, using the prefix re or e, we can use the verb revoir to mean to see again or to review, as in this following example. J'ai revu le chapitre 26 avant de regarder cette vidéo. Which means, I reviewed lesson 26 before watching this video. Alright, enough about seeing and let's talk about learning, because we're about to dive into relative pronouns. So there's no easy way to say this, but you will either instantly get it or not. If this is complicated for you, I strongly encourage you to practice identifying subjects and objects in English sentences. Because before we do this in French, you need to be able to do it in English. A common example we saw at the beginning of this class is when to use who and when to use whom. This is, as far as I know, the only visual way to see when a relative pronoun is a subject or an object in English. However, most people forget about whom and use who all the time, so this won't really help. And we also have to see what happens when the relative pronoun is the English word that, because in French we have two different words depending on if it's the subject or object of the sentence. And remember that in English you sometimes remove the relative pronouns, where the book that I read becomes the book I read. You cannot do that in French. Relative pronouns cannot be removed. So what I'm going to do today is tell you the rule first, and then I'll show you a way to identify if things are objects or subjects with examples. So first, if you think qui is for people and que is for things, Forget this. We are not talking about questions here. This means our sentences won't have a question mark in the end. We have two types of relative pronouns, definite and indefinite. Definite relative pronouns means that we know what we are talking about. For example, the book that I read. Indefinite relative pronouns will use in English the word what, but remember again without a question mark. For example, you understand what I mean. What here is an indefinite relative pronoun. I mean something, but I'm not spelling it out like in the sentence, the point that I make. Alright, first, for definite relative pronouns, regardless of if it's a person or a thing, if it's the subject of your sentence, it's qui, Q-U-I. And if it's the object of your sentence, it's que, Q-U-E. Let's put a pin in indefinite relative pronouns for now, and let's try to work on subject versus object with examples with our definite relative pronoun. What I want you to do is to try to make a sentence with the word that, who, or whom that can be split into two different sentences by repeating one word. Here's an example. The book that I read is read can become I read the book and the book is read. There are two pieces of information here. Another example is the book that is read is long can become the book is read and the book is long. Now, what matters here is that the word that replaces the word the book in these sentences. When we make two sentences out of one sentence, we want to know if the book is the subject or the object of the part of the sentence that used to contain the word that. Spoiler alert, it will usually be the one that comes right after that, who or whom. So in our first example, the book that I read is read. The two sentences we were able to make out were I read the book and the book is read. I read the book replaces the part of the sentence that I read. And in the sentence I read the book is an object. This is why the sentence will be le livre que je lis, using que, Q-U-E, for an object. But in the sentence the book that is read is long, the part of the sentence that replaces the word that is the book is read. And here, the book is the subject of that sentence. So we will need to use qui, Q-U-I, making the sentence le livre qui est rouge est long. Okay, let's pause for a second. I know this is super hard, and I can bet half of you didn't understand it. So I'm going to give you a way to cheat here. I don't like it, but you know, it's easier, and if you like to be pointed into a specific direction, it will work for you. If you look at the word that, who or whom in a sentence that is not a question, and remember, sometimes in English it is removed, so add it back. Look at the word right after it. In 99% of the cases, this will work. If you have a subject, meaning I, you, he, she, etc., or even John, the parents, etc., this will mean that the relative pronoun that, who, or whom is an object. Why? Because if you have an obvious subject after the relative pronoun cannot also be the subject. Take this following example. The person whom I like is short. There, it should be whom in English, but some people might put who or even remove that word. Because you have the subject I after whom has to be an object. Now, you can also learn to cheat the other way around by identifying obvious subject-relative pronouns. So if the word after that or who is a verb, that or who will most evidently be a subject. Don't believe me? Look at this example. The person who liked my book is tall. Liked is the verb to like, conjugated in the preterite. Another one, the book that is read. Is the verb to be. Another one again, the lesson that breaks my brain. Here the verb breaks comes right after the relative pronoun that. So the relative pronoun that must be a subject. And because it's a subject, the sentence will be la leçon qui me casse le cerveau. Alright, I think this should help you, but before we go on something more fun, I need to tell you that when the relative pronoun is indefinite, meaning in English it is the word what, we will use the same exact rule, except we will add the word ce in front of it. So, what bothers me is this lesson will be ce qui me dérange, c'est cette leçon. You should have spotted that the word coming right after what is bothers, a verb. Therefore, the relative pronoun is a subject. But in the example, I like what you eat, the word right after what is you, a subject. Therefore, our relative pronoun has to be an object. And our sentence will be j'aime ce que tu manges. Finally, one last relative pronoun, but this one is easy. It's the word où with an accent, and it means where. You will simply replace the word where with où, as in the restaurant where I eat becomes le restaurant où je mange. But the one point I need to add is that it will also translate when as a relative pronoun. Basically, if you see the time when, or the year when, or the day when, etc., this will use the relative pronoun où. Alright, enough about relative pronouns. This one is tiring even for me. I hope you will download the class notes to see more examples and try to practice on your own, making your own non-interrogative sentences in English with the words that, where, when, what, who or whom. And then try to translate them into French. What I want to do now is show you some fun French expressions with the word dents, which means teeth. You can just learn them as is and have fun with them. So when someone holds a grudge against someone else, in French, we say they have a tooth against someone. Avoir une dent contre quelqu'un. So to say Jane has a grudge against Paul, we would say Jeanne a une dent contre Paul. Another fun one is when something is surreal and will never happen. In English, you like to say when pigs fly. Well, in French we say when hens will have teeth. Quand les poules auront des dents. One more expression is about someone who is very opportunistic or ambitious in the way that they would do anything to succeed, even if that means walking over you. We will say that they have long teeth. Maybe to refer to them being bloodsuckers, I don't know. So if you hear someone say, il a les dents longues, don't think they're talking about their teeth literally. They're trying to tell you to watch out for this person. Alright, that's it for today. And remember to download the notes, like this video if you enjoyed it, and to subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. And as usual, I'd love to see you use what we've learned in the comments in French. Maybe tell me about someone who has long teeth, or something that you've seen on TV or in the theater. In the meantime, I hope you learned something, and I'll see you on the next one. Au revoir. Petit chat, tu es mignon.